Alright, now that we have our character rigged from the last video, we're going to animate him this video. Alright, so there's two different, divisions now. If you're going to animate for, like, let's say a movie or something, you're pretty much set to go. You can start making acting sequences and all that. You would take your character and you basically move him out of the box and just keep going forward and just start animating with them and do whatever you want, make creative cycles and interesting scenes and all that. But for gaming, we need to take the character and put him into the game engine. So what we're going to do is create a series of action sequences that the keyboard can control later in the game engine. So what we're going to do is have the character basically idle, so he's like breathing and standing still, but not a static standing still, and we're going to have him walk forward. You could do a whole bunch more animations, let's say jumping and running and all that, but we're only going to code 2 of them so far in the next video. But you can go and do a whole bunch more. The difference being between animation and gaming is that the animation character would basically walk out and go throughout this entire level and scene and environment, not necessarily level, but interaction within the 3D world. For gaming, he's not going to leave this box. He's going to stay walking in place like he's on a treadmill. This way, when you code him, you're not going to worry about the environment. You just want to make sure that his animation cycle walks in place and does everything he needs without actually physically moving in this virtual world. So that's two different what we're going to work on. So if you're going for animation, you just make him move wherever he wants to go. But since we're doing gaming right now and exporting, we're going to walk him in place. So for the idle position, I'm going to basically have him stand still. And over here is the timeline from 1 all the way, and you can slide it to 24. So we have 24 frames per second, or 24 frames on the timeline. We can have more. Standard HD TV for animation is 30 frames per second. But 24 should work fine, and we don't even have to use all 24 if we don't want to, whatever it takes to make them look realistically believable. So for frame 1, we're going to key his position. So over here is going to be our controls, and we can set these to whatever numbers we want. We can also key them to basically save their position. Right now, we have the main master control, and I can key this one, but it doesn't really affect the other ones, so I'm going to key each of these individual ones. So let's say he's going to start here. I'm going to click on this one, and I can press S on the keyboard, and it reds everything right here. So all of these have now been keyed. And I can go to the foot if I want to, and instead of pressing S, I could say, I know I want to move his foot forward, so, or I guess forward in this case would be Z. So I'll go right click and key selected, and that key is one option. So I can key it manually like that, one at a time, or I can press S on the keyboard and key everything. His feet probably won't move for the idle sequence. You could have him like tapping his toes if you wanted to. You just basically just rotate his toes if you wanted to tap or whatever. But I'm going to probably have him just kind of like breathing up and down, bobbing up and down, so I just keyed everything. But I could just key the translates Y, I guess, if I wanted to. So on frame 1, he's going to be all the way up, and let's say if he takes 24 frames to breathe, I'll key it again and press S, and so it keys everything. So I put a red mark here and a red mark here, so it's now keyed. And this button right here is auto key. If it's clicked on, any movement you make will automatically be keyed. You don't have to press S. If you uncheck that, now it's not on. Now you have to manually right-click, key selected, or press S on the keyboard. So I'm going to leave the auto key turned on. So let's say frame 12, let's move him down. So I'm going to go to move, and I'm going to move him down somewhere about there. And since it's on auto key, it automatically put a red mark there. And if I press play now, you can see that he's moving up and down. If I decide that it's too much down movement, I can go back to frame 12, clicking right there, and move him up just a little bit, and then press play again, and it'll automatically be saved. So now he's breathing a little bit. If you wanted to super exaggerate that, you could push him all the way down to the ground, and now he'll be like really excited. So I'm going to put that back kind of like a subtle little breathing gesture. You could also rock him forward if you wanted to. let's say go to rotate and rock him forward. So now he's breathing a little more realistically. He's like bending forward, and when you zoom out in the game, that'll be a slight little motion. So however he's moving, if you're moving him forward or not, you can tell that has some life to him. He's a little bit moving. So that's all we need to worry about here. I'm going to press stop on that. If you wanted to, for some reason, get rid of a key, also note there's no keys on the timeline anymore. It only applies to your selected objects. So since we didn't key the foot, there's no red keyframes. But if I click on this body ring, it has 3 keyframes because we've keyed the body. And again, the same thing applies. The root hasn't been keyed. We have no need to move the root. So I'm going to take this one, or you could take all of them. And what we need to do right now is bake the animation into the keyframes. You can either do this on export or do this manually. So in order to do that, you would go over to create, edit, keys, bake simulation. If you pull up the side menu right here, there's a couple of settings you could play with, but everything by default should be fine. And what bake simulation does is that it'll bake all the different keyframes. So if you have a lot of transitions or basically anything, it'll bake it all across your timeline. And then once you're done, you basically leave this as one finished file. Or, let's close that. You can also just do that in export. You don't have to bake it. What baking would look like was to take like a fraction of a second and have red keys every spot of the way. So as the character is bending, just a little bit of keys, keys, everything. And so that's important for the importing animation to the game engine. Let's go File and just do Export Selection. So make sure you select everything. You can go File, Export Selection, and we don't need to pull up the side menu. You can pull it up if you want. It's an FBX export. Cancel that. I'll just go regular File, Export Selection. So here's where we have our options now. We want to go and make sure, let's pop out file type specific options. That's where all these most of what we need are included in. We need definitely to make sure animation is checked. So make sure animation is checked. We're exporting that. Here's the bake animation part. So rather than going to edit keys and all that, you can just say bake animation, and the numbers aren't. As long as the numbers are long enough, you should be fine. You don't have to bake all the way more than you need. It's 24 is all we need, but it's set to 48. And everything else should be fine. Try and match whatever settings here. Don't click on constraints, leave that blank, leave these other ones. All you have to worry about is bake animation and click animation. And we're doing an FBX export. There could be a few other ones down here, but since we're setting it to Unity, and Unity uses the FBX pretty well, we're going to use FBX export, and I'm going to call this one, there's a couple ways we can do this, but I'm going to call this let's call this character underscore idle. And so this will be our idle animation. What we could do is we could export just one character by himself without animation and attach the animation to him, or we could export a character that has all the animation built into him, or we could export each different character that has the animation built into them. So there's a couple different ways we could do this. I'm going to export the character with the idle animation right now. And that should give us the export. Okay, and now that we've exported out the animation, we want to basically leave this scene alone. So I'm going to say File, Save Scene As, and I'm going to call this one Character Idle Animation, and save, and leave this one alone. Alright, now I'm going to go open up the original one. So I could keep making multiple animations in the same timeline and just have the game engine pick and choose from them, or I can just make separate animation files. So either option works. I'm going to go open recent video. I guess it was this guy. Alright, so this should be where we last left off with. So I'm going to change the animation now. So we're going to go from frame 1 I'm just going to grab everything, I guess, and S, just so everything's keyed, and let's just say he can walk in 16 frames, so let's do 24 frames. I'll S everything on that one as well, so everything's been keyed. So if I click on this one, or this one, or this one, everything's been keyed. So that's a quick way of setting keys. Alright, so now everything's been keyed. On frame 12 will be the passing one. So actually frame 1 should probably be adjusted. So we're going to put the foot here and the other foot back here so he's walking a bit. And then I'm going to take his body and slightly turn it because he's walking that direction. And he can't just lift up his foot and walk, he's just going to fall over. So if he's going to do that, we need to basically pivot him left and right. So at the moment he's grounded, so that's where we can leave him at. So everything we've just keyed, everything we'll just re-S that on number 1 and number 24. Oops. Let's delete this keyframe and then re-S it again. So we'll go from 1 to 24. 12 needs to be the inverse, so I'm going to take this one and slide it backwards. Not quite until his leg pops off the ground, but about there. And then slide this one forwards, not too far, but I guess about there. And then we'll rotate his body the other direction now. And then maybe I can adjust his feet a little more. And take this foot. Okay, so now we have, basically he's sliding across. If I were to press play, his feet are sliding and he's moving. Not very realistic yet, so we're going to adjust the walk. So by frame, let's see, he's right here in 12, and he's right here in 1 to 12. So on 6, we need to make some adjustments. So right now, this foot on the right, which is his left foot, is coming up. So this foot needs to be up here because it's going to be lifted. And with auto key already on, he should automatically be lifting his foot up as he walks forward. So, cool. But again, he can't just lift his foot up. He's going to fall over. If he does that, he's going to fall straight down. So we're going to pivot him. So as he's lifting his foot up, he should be balancing himself, most of his weight, on top of this foot at this point. So I'm going to grab this foot and pivot it in. So now as he walks, he's going to be pivoting on here and then landing back there. And this should be reset back to 0. So this is translate. They're both moving. Alright, translate X is what it says here. So translate X is 0 at this point. It's way over here. So translate X should be back to 0 at this point. So we can see he's stepped over a lot. That might be a little too much, so I'm going to pull that back a bit more. So he'll slide his foot over to there and land. Alright, he should also bob up and down when he does this, so he's going to get taller at this point. So he'll lift up and land. But he also needs to shrink back down. So I'm going to reset the translation. So whereas it was 0 here, it should be back to 0. And this was vertical, so this is Y. Y should be back to 0. So he'll lift up and come back down. Lift up and back down. Alright, so starting to get in place. 12, however, should be on the ground now. So this should again be 0. So he lifts up and lands. Alright, and then we'll repeat that for the other direction. So on 18, we'll key this S. And this one should be sliding back now. So from here goes forward. 18 is already sliding back, and there. So this one should now be the one being lifted. His body should be over this direction. His foot should also be over this direction. So he's stepping, and he's not lifting yet. His body lifted this much for there, so let's go up about the same. And that foot's okay. Alright, so let's press play and see what it looks like. So, basics of a walk cycle. His feet should probably be a bit closer inwards as he's walking. So that ended at Z of 0.94. Oops, wasn't Z. 0.378. 0.378. So this one we're going to slide in. Which means this also needs to slide in. Negative 0.6. Oops. Negative 0.655. All right. Negative 0.655. All right. And that pretty much gets him walking. Except for that back leg. The back leg is lifting off the ground too much. At this point it should be flat on the ground, which is 0. There we go. So we got our character walking. Alright, good enough. Alright, so we'll select everything, go File, Export Selection, Animation is checked, Bake Animation is on there, everything else is good. We'll go to Character Walk, Export Selection, and then File, Save Scene As, and call this Character Walk. So we have two separate categories now. We have the character idle and the character walk animation. Press save, and we're good to go.